News 2 presents To the Point.
Our big story today, the possibility of a near-total abortion ban in South Carolina. A state lawmaker joining me in studio today to break down the proposals and changes that could come. Plus, a judge ruling that certain forms of execution that were recently allowed in South Carolina are now unconstitutional. What led up to the decision and what it means for people on death row. Good morning. Welcome to the Point, the show where we break down the political issues and elections that matter to you from across the Lowcountry, here in South Carolina, and the entire nation. Thank you so much for joining us this Sunday morning. I'm Riley Benson. Our big story this morning, the possible abortion ban in South Carolina. This week, we have a South Carolina lawmaker who's been passionate about the issue. Joining me here in studio to break down the latest, but first, we want to start with the latest on the bill. Our State House reporter, Jason Raven, has our report.
About a week ago, the South Carolina House passed H. 5399. Now, that bill would outlaw almost all abortions in South Carolina, and at the time, it contained limited exceptions. The Senate Medical Affairs Committee met Tuesday to decide whether or not to send the House's bill to the Senate floor. Now, Senator Richard Cash of Anderson County proposed an amendment in committee that would remove limited rape and incest exceptions the House added to the bill on the floor last week. Now, Senator Cash said it's not fair for a woman to be in this situation, but also not fair for the abortion to be performed.
But just as a matter of nature, the only way any of us get into the world is through pregnancy. And once the life has started, once the baby is developing, it's there. It's an existential reality.
During the meeting, the panel voted to remove these exceptions for rape and incest up to 12 weeks into a pregnancy. The senators voted 7-3 to do that. Now, Democrats on the panel did not vote. And this is similar to what House Democrats did last week in the hopes a bill without these exceptions would not gain enough support in a Republican-controlled chamber from passing.
I just can't imagine what it would be like to have a child conceived by rape or incest and being told you don't have any say-so in the matter.
As of Tuesday afternoon, the bill only allows an abortion if the mother's life is in danger. Now, Senator Tom Davis of Beaufort County says the legislation fails to strike a fair balance between two rights.
No mention was meant of an indisputable right to a woman for autonomy over her body. Now we can talk about what constraints you want to put on that right. You can talk about what point in time during the pregnancy that right has to yield to the right of the unborn child. But there is another right.
Now, the full Senate is returning Wednesday morning. In Columbia, I'm Jason Raven.
And State House Representative Spencer Whitmire is joining me now in studio. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me, Riley.
Of course, we're talking about abortion. It's something that's been discussed for a period of time now in South Carolina since the overturn of Roe v. Wade. Being discussed in the Senate right now. What's the latest from your standpoint as a House representative and kind of where this debate stands?
Yeah, so, when it left the South Carolina House, we had, the Republicans actually had put in an exception for rape and incest, in addition to what I consider to be the absolute bare minimum that the Supreme Court required, the life of the mother. So when it went over to the Senate, it had those. Now, the Republicans in the Senate have taken out the exception for rape and incest. So at this point, it goes to the Senate floor with no exceptions.
Obviously, you've been very passionate about this topic issue. Kind of talk to me about the concerns that you have and where this stands right now.
Yeah, listen, at its basic level, I think what we have to recognize is that women should decide when, if, and how to become parents. And so taking that decision away from them is obviously my first concern. But this bill in particular is incredibly broad. It brings a lot of government into your family. And so I think people have concerns about that. We're seeing people very upset about the fact that it will not only criminalize doctors. So, if a doctor performs this, let's say a doctor believes that it's important for the health of the mother, but a zealous prosecutor doesn't agree, well, the doctor can face 2 years in prison, loss of their license, in addition to a civil lawsuit. It criminalizes women by criminalizing the purchase of abortion medication. So over half of abortions today are done through what's called abortion medication, misoprostol, And it criminalizes the purchase of that. So if a woman wants to purchase it and self-manage her own care, now she's a felon too.
Let's talk about the reproductive rights bill that you sponsored right around the same time that all this is taking place. Yeah. Talk to me about the bill, what you're hoping to accomplish with it, and what it means.
Sure. Listen, I serve in the South Carolina House because of my children and all South Carolina children. And so, of course, I want to protect and serve families. So I really believe that this bill answers what South Carolina families and the people of South Carolina want. Of course, it protects women's health care. It protects access to contraceptives. It protects IVF and fertility treatment. And of course, it protects access to abortion. Now, one of the things that, of course, these national organizations that push these pro-life and extreme bills, they say, oh, late-term abortions of convenience. Well, that's not a thing. I've never known anyone. Late-term abortions are first of all, they're 1% of abortions, and they're the saddest situations. It's almost always a situation where a child has an incredible abnormality incompatible with life, or the mother's health and life is at stake. But just to make sure that we aren't allowing late-term abortions of convenience, the bill actually prohibits that and says that only in the case of rape, incest, the health and life of a mother, or fetal abnormalities will those be permitted. So we want to make sure that women are getting the health care they need, that doctors aren't fleeing South Carolina for fear of criminal prosecution, and that families decide when they're ready to bring their children here into South Carolina.
Representative Whitmire, this is obviously an active debate. We see that happening this week in the Senate. It's hard to predict what could happen, but do you have any kind of prediction as to where this is headed at this point?
If you had asked me that before this week, I think I would have said that I thought a bill with exceptions would pass. But now seeing what's happening in the Senate, that's a huge debate. I think Republicans are starting to understand that the vast majority of South Carolinians want abortion to remain safe and legal. And so either this bill will pass, and I think women are extremely, men and women, but are extremely fired up about elections in November, or they will listen to the will of the people and put the brakes on it.
Representative, thank you so much for your time today. I
Of course.
appreciate you joining the show.
Thank you.
And coming up after the break, News 2's political analyst John Burcini will join me to break down what we just heard. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back to The Point. News 2's political analyst John Burcini is joining me now. John, we're in our new digs. How do you feel?
Oh, this feels great. This has been a long time coming.
It has. Let's get to it now. Obviously, we're talking about abortion. It's a serious topic. It's a big topic in South Carolina since the overturn of Roe v. Wade. We heard from Representative Spencer Whitmire. Obviously, the Senate is debating this as we speak this week. Talk to me. You heard Senator Sandy Senn, who's a local senator here in the Low Country. Some passionate, takes from her today or this week.
Certainly. So just some of the remarks that she's actually made on the Senate floor were quite compelling. She publicly said that this should go to a referendum in November. Let the voters decide, similar to what we saw in Kansas, right. What their position is. She's basically saying that this is not something that we want. Women need to have autonomy over their bodies, and this is a step too far, specifically by men in the General Assembly.
And we had Representative Spencer Whitmire here on the studio with us today too to talk about this. And obviously she is in the House. It passed out of the House to go to the Senate. You heard her, her arguments, her passion about this. Kind of, what's your takeaway from what we heard from the representative?
So certainly, Spencer Whitmire, Representative Whitmire, she's offered up an alternative bill, some additional measures to provide some protections, all the way from family planning to contraceptive, things of that effect. Again, this really helps to highlight some of the partisan divide that we're seeing in the General Assembly, specifically on the Republican Party side.
Right.
This is something Republicans have been talking about for decades now, and it's just sort of the question, what happens when the dog actually catches the car? We're seeing some divisions there that we haven't seen in the past.
Well, it was something I think the representative touched on too, is a lot of people are really against what, the latest version of this bill. Obviously, you take out rape and incest exceptions. It seems like that is causing a lot of issues as this debate's ongoing. I mean, even talking about taking those exceptions out of this bill and how that impacts how people are feeling about it.
So it was forecasted going into this week, there was a wide belief that if a bill that did not include exceptions for rape, incest, and life of the mother would not get through the South Carolina Senate. Interestingly, the Medical Affairs Committee actually removed those provisions. So when that bill hit the floor, it didn't have exceptions for rape or incest. That's going to be tough for some of the senators to actually vote on. Again, there's passion on both sides of the aisle here. Tom Davis, in particular, senator from Beaufort, not too terribly far from us, has got very strong beliefs that any bill needs to have exceptions for rape and incest. It'll be interesting to see how this pans out.
Even Senator Marlon Kempson, who's obviously a local to Charleston, had some passionate expressions, things he shared on Twitter, kind of following up what Senator Senn said on the floor, as you mentioned. So certainly interesting. I mean, where does this go from here? Obviously, we're still in the thick of this debate.
So certainly, Senator Kempson yesterday basically said, lipstick on a pig, it is still a pig. He believes it's a bad bill across the board. Many Democrats probably hold a very similar view to what Senator Kempson has. This is really a debate within the Republican Party, and that's something they're going to really have to come to terms on, what they're willing to accept and what they're not. This is going to be probably one of the closest votes that we have seen in the General Assembly in quite some time. Remember, last week it actually failed in the House before it passed. They just kept voting basically until they got the number of votes. I don't know if we'll see something similar to that in the Senate, but at the end of the day, though, I think it'll be closer to what some folks expect.
John, thank you so much. And of course, you can count on us to have the conversation about abortion in the ban here in South Carolina and where this goes next. Thank you. New booster shots have experts hopeful that we can avoid a fall COVID surge, but the White House COVID team says the pandemic could get worse if Congress does not act. Washington correspondent Hannah Brandt explains why.
The White House COVID team says their pandemic budget is running out. And now that Congress is back from break, they're pleading with lawmakers to pass more COVID funding. It may be time for a trip to your local pharmacy.
Get your updated COVID-19 shot as soon as you are eligible.
A new booster was just approved specifically to fight the latest variant. The White House COVID team says this could become an annual routine.
I really believe this is why God gave us two arms, one for the flu shot and the other one for the COVID shot.
But along with this rollout, they have a warning.
While we may have the vaccines today for folks for this fall vaccine effort, we don't know what's coming next.
They already asked Congress to pass more pandemic funding 6 months ago, but that didn't happen, and the White House says their COVID budget has been dwindling ever since. In order to make these new boosters free and widely available, they say they had to make tough choices and cut things like their free test website.
We need to play the long game against this virus. That is going to require additional resources from Congress.
Right now, Congress is debating a new budget for the upcoming year, and the White House team says lawmakers have a responsibility.
It is now critical that you step up and provide additional COVID-19 funding so we can stay ahead of this virus.
Specifically, the White House is requesting $22 billion for future COVID vaccines, testing, and research. In Washington, I'm Hannah Brandt.
Our third point today, South Carolina judge ruling the state's execution methods, both electric chair and firing squad, are unconstitutional. What it means for inmates on death row moving forward. A Count on 2 update. A judge ruled the state's execution methods are unconstitutional. Four death row inmates filed a lawsuit challenging the newly created firing squad and electric chair option.
I was heartened to see the the South Carolina court yesterday overturn these as potential cruel and unusual punishments, as inhumane.
An upstate judge said South Carolina forcing inmates to choose between death by firing squad or the electric chair is prohibited by the Constitution, adding the state, quote, turned back the clock. State Representative Spencer Whitmire supports the ruling.
These are both incredibly barbaric methods of execution. The potential for botched executions, the potential for pain and suffering by the inmates is incredibly high.
Now state leaders faced with the challenge, with drugs needed for lethal injection nearly impossible to get, paired with the decision, political analyst John Burcini says it's back to the drawing board.
The path forward really depends on how far they want to take it. The state, if they were willing to entertain additional methods of execution, those probably would have been included already.
One option Burcini says elected officials could consider, the state taking things into its own hands.
Some have basically called for the state to make its own drugs. We might see some additional conversations expand to explore what possibilities might exist.
The debate is likely to continue. Representative Whitmire says new methods for death row inmates could go beyond capital punishment.
I think we have to ask ourselves, is this what we want to be in the business of as a state? Or should we be looking at other forms of punishment for our inmates who are convicted in these heinous crimes?
Political analyst John Burcini joining me again. And John, obviously this has been a topic. I think it's really gained more traction this summer. We saw the firing squad come out. That's Senator Dick Harpootlian's bill that was obviously put in place. Those are struck down now. No firing squad, no electric chair. What does that mean for South Carolina? We haven't had an execution since 2011. You can't get the drugs for lethal injection. So, where do we go from here and what does it mean?
So, politically, this is challenging. Legally, this will probably certainly run its course. It'll be exhausted through our legal system. Interestingly, if you paid attention to the debate in the House specifically, Representative Justin Bamberg brought up the fact that they fully expected the firing squad in particular to be deemed unconstitutional.
Right.
And this is where we find ourselves. Right now, as you indicated, the state has no method of execution. They can't get the drugs. A lot of the European companies have stopped making them or refused to sell them if they know what they're going to be used for.
Right.
Where we go from here, again, capital punishment is the law. Again, the death penalty is on the books. We've got a number of individuals right now actually on death row. They're in limbo, and it seems like they've been in limbo for quite some time now.
Well, it's 10 years. I think 2011 was the last time that the states had an execution. So, are there other methods that have been discussed? Are there ways that this could still happen? Or are we looking at another period of 10 years where we're kind of in a holding pattern?
So again, challenging. So again, there are legal considerations to take into consideration, and then certainly the political ramifications as well too. I would imagine that if they were open to exploring other methods, those probably would have been discussed and included. And this was bipartisan. It's important to mention that this was not a Republican idea. This was not a Democratic idea. State Senator Dick Harpootlian, who you indicated earlier, it was his idea to introduce the firing squad, modeled closely after the state of Utah. Again, he's a Democrat. It was supported by his Republican colleagues. Where, again, the General Assembly goes from here is going to be challenging. I've heard ideas that the state may try to make their own drugs. They certainly may challenge the ruling, that the current ruling is high as what they can possibly go. State Supreme Court, and this may wind up in federal courts. Again, who really knows where this goes from here? But again, it does present an issue.
I guess an interesting question, is this issue on the ballot this fall for voters in South Carolina?
So probably not as much as what we're seeing some other issues.
Right.
Abortion certainly is going to be a very big driver out to the polls. There is talk right now that may be a single issue for a lot of folks. If we look at voting blocks, again, these are just our groups of people that vote together. Suburban women, we've indicated earlier, may significantly turn out in very large numbers because of the Roe versus Wade decision that we saw just a few months ago. Some of that would depend on what the action that the state takes. Again, we indicated abortion earlier.
Right.
But nevertheless, though, as a voting bloc, women right now are fired up, and I wouldn't be surprised at all to see a very strong turnout in November.
John, certainly something that we'll continue to watch here on To The Point and bring you the latest information as this situation unfolds and develops here in South Carolina. News 2 is your local election headquarters. Governor Henry McMaster bringing his re-election campaign to downtown Charleston at a furniture store on Morrison Drive. The governor says if he's re-elected, he'll keep putting businesses first. He says the economy in our state is in a good spot today because of decisions he made during the pandemic to keep things open, even with the added pressures of global challenges with supply chain issues and inflation.
It takes a lot of work, and it pays off. And the strength that we have in South Carolina is our business. I often say South Carolina's business is business.
The National Federation of Independent Business, which describes itself as a grassroots organization that advocates for small businesses, also endorsed the governor this week. Student loan forgiveness could cause some long-term problems for taxpayers. One finance professor at Wofford University says forgiving $10,000 to $20,000 of loans provides a small stimulus that could go back into the economy. He warns taxpayers may ultimately have to pay for it in 30 to 40 years. This is because it's added to the federal debt.
In some ways, this was an attempt to to address the symptoms of a problem. People have taken on so much debt that many of them aren't able to pay it back. but it never dealt with fixing the system that created the problem. All we did was put a Band-Aid on the system.
Is the forgiveness does not address how much borrowers can take out. So it's good says you still must address the issue that allowed people to borrow more than they are able to pay back. That's all the time we have here on To The Point. For John Burcini and myself, we'll see you next week, next Sunday. And of course, this is the place where you can find the latest political news. Catch us every Sunday morning right here on News 2 at 11 a.m. Have a great Sunday.